do you think about Pixar considering rebooting The Incredibles and Finding Nemo? In my mind, that feels a little bit like Pixar throwing in the towel. That is like them admitting that they have completely lost the magic. And all they can rely on to try and have hits is to mine the past. That's a scary thought if that's something they actually do. So there's an article that came out just a little bit ago from Bloomberg. And they're basically, it's an interview, a lot of it with Peter Docter, the guy that's over Pixar right now. This is a quote from the article. After Lightyear lost millions of dollars in 2022 and Elemental had Pixar's worst ever opening weekend performance the following year, there was a real intense period of self-scrutiny and feeling like we messed up in some ways, Docter says. Executives hosted post-mortems to determine how to revitalize the studio, he recalls. They arrived at mentoring Pixar's upcoming directors to focus less on autobiographical tales. Luca had been inspired by its director's childhood in Italy, Turning Red by its director's relationship with her mother, Elemental, which did gain some momentum overseas and online by its director's immigrant family. Pixar would instead develop concepts with clear mass appeal, many of which, in the case of sequels and spin-offs, had already been proven. The studio's movies should be less a pursuit of any director's catharsis and instead speak to commonality of experience, Docter says. I don't think we can ever let ourselves off the hook for making sure that we deliver the best possible and most relatable films. That is I feel like that is about 40% good reflection, 60% yikes. That is a really bad takeaway. And when you combine it with the other, where the executive CEOs basically said that we're trying to revitalize our franchises, so we're thinking about possibly doing reboots of The Incredibles, Finding Nemo. You combine that all of this together, and it is a very dire time for Pixar, where instead of it being about trying to tell original stories and finding just great creative stories, they're just desperately trying to find how to have hits again by doing what's familiar and what's already worked. That is not the mindset, the mentality that made Pixar this strong studio, where their 15-year run from Toy Story to Toy Story 3, right there were sequels even back then, but like we're doing movies, like half of WALL-E is a silent film about a robot, and then we're doing a story about a chef that's a rat, and all of these just creative original stories. And when they had a sequel that they felt inspired by, they'd make it. That's fine. That's not the same thing as, oh crap, Elemental had a bad opening weekend, let's just redo Finding Nemo. Like rebooting Finding Nemo, what are you talking about? There's nothing dated about Finding Nemo. There's nothing to remake. There's nothing to redo there. And it's not a story that lends itself to sequels. We did Finding Dory, and it's fine, but it just feels like a rehash because it's not a story that lends itself to continuing the adventures of members of the family getting lost. And so this like reads to me like they've completely lost their way, that the executives, the board, the shareholders are calling the shots. It's now a bean counter studio where all we care about is finding the next hit. But like I said, there's some truth in this, to where, like when he says we need to focus less on being autobiographical and not just about director's catharsis, I go, there's probably some truth to that. Like there's a side to it of projects. You can't just make a project that's about you. You have to think about the audience too. And they were able to do both for a long time. There's a lot of really specific things in all of those movies from their original 15-year run that are very personal, that have autobiographical elements to them, but they were done in a way that was very broadly accessible. And I don't think they've done that as well recently. There's just something not quite right in there. And maybe that's the simple fact that they lost some of their top talent. I've frequently talked about Lasseter as a uniquely talented person that was outed because of bad behavior. I don't think he should have kept his job just because he was talented, but also acknowledge the truth. He was very good at his job, like very, very good at providing leadership for 2 different studios and telling original stories that had very broad appeal, but were also very emotional. And they don't seem nearly as good at that anymore. That in their calibration of how do we make it broad appeal? How do we make it personal and touch on things that the director's deeply connected to? How do we do that? It's not, the formula's not quite right. But the other thing that's just the insane kind of hypocrisy, or like, how are you missing this in these quotes, starts off with, after Lightyear lost millions of dollars. And of these movies, Lightyear is the one that got the big, broad theatrical release. It had a character that people know, and it still lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Felt like a horrible miscalculation. That's the one that's the familiar property. And that's the one that lost all the money. That one wasn't Disney Plus. Turning Red, Luca, those are streaming movies. We don't even know what they would have done in theaters. We do know the one that is a spinoff with a familiar character lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Your reaction to, well, because Turning Red and Luca, the 2 that were dropped on Disney Plus, didn't make money, our answer is to follow the formula of the one that was released in theaters and lost hundreds of millions of dollars. That's crazy. That's like, how are you missing this? You started off by pointing out, man, yeah, Lightyear flopped. Therefore, we're going to correct the mistakes we made with the 2 movies that we dropped on streaming and aren't really a good gauge of what the movies, we don't know what they would have done in theaters because we didn't release them in theaters. So who knows? So I think that Pixar, that it is a sad state with where they're at right now, with the choices that are making, the statements that they're publicly saying are alarming and concerning. And instead of like, okay, let's pull it back. Let's maybe make some safe bets, but also just let's pull back our budgets and let's try and get back to what worked, what made our studio famous in the first place, with very original storytelling, with deep, broadly accessible emotions that are relatable. Like, let's do all of that, and take these risks, but you can't spend $200 million on a risk. Spend less money and get the excitement again. And maybe you spend $200 million on your Toy Story 5 or whatever. That's a pretty safe bet. But everything else about this is, it's scary that Pixar would be like, oh crap, this isn't working. Let's remake The Incredibles. Most of these clips are pulled from my Patreon live streams. I do about 6 live streams every single month. For $2 per month, $20 per year, you can get access to all the exclusive videos and live streams. For $5 per month, you get your name on my end card. At the top tier, you get a 30-minute video chat with me each month. The link down below in the description has more information.